Okay, class. I hope you have a good weekend and enjoy the videos. There are two of them today, remember that. I hope that you actually did your reading before you're watching this, pages 103 to 109. It is important that you take note of those because you won't really understand what's going on if you don't. Okay, so in class on Thursday, we covered personal experience with that idea of firsthand evidence. Now we're going to look at this idea of anecdote and current events. Anecdote is the idea of telling a story. It's that idea that someone else told you the story and now you're using that story to tell somebody else. Or it's that idea that you have a personal experience, but you are like being more specific and more detailed and you're not necessarily putting I in there. The other side of anecdote is the idea that you are providing evidence. So you're usually providing a little moral or an example to go with it. An anecdote is very short, it's very simple, and it's very to the point. Okay, the next one, current events, is the idea of something that is currently going on that you have experienced or have been involved in. As an example, with 9/11, that was when I was there. I mean, I wasn't in New York, but I experienced it because of the fact that I actually went through the experience. I was here in LA and there were certain events that were happening, and I could tell people about things because I was currently there in the moment. Another example was the one that Edwin and Norar had brought up in class on Thursday, was the idea that if you were currently there but not necessarily involved, and you were a witness to it, could you give that as evidence? You can. That would fit under personal experience, and in some cases it would fit as current events. Current events also could be if there was an earthquake and you were involved in it and it happened here, a tsunami, a tornado, those types of things, being interviewed for things that are currently happening and taking place. Okay, secondhand evidence is different. Secondhand evidence is the idea that you aren't there, you don't have that involvement, so you have to have gotten the evidence from somewhere else, from something else. So the firsthand evidence is more the ethos and pathos. The secondhand evidence is more the logos aspect. So we have three kinds. We have historical information, we have expert opinion, and we have quantitative evidence. So the historical information is the fact that you can give dates and statistics from previously. So talking about Abraham Lincoln's presidency, that's historical information, and seeing how it fits into what's taking place within the other aspects and tying to what you're talking about is important. This is used a lot in courts when they bring in previous court cases and they talk about how judges have cited those and used those with the laws. So that historical information is important. Expert opinion. Someone is a very good expert in their field. Like I'm an expert in British literature and American literature. So that is my keyhole and why I teach that topic. In the courthouse or in a court, in a trial, someone who is an expert and giving expert opinion can be someone who is a witness, not necessarily to the idea of what happened, but they can be like a crime scene analyzer and they can have that expert aspect of looking at crime scenes and they could be a witness on that aspect. So that expert opinion is important with the fact of the information it's lending. That person is a specialist in their field, so they have that priority. They have that that ethos to go with it. So they've built it and people know it. Okay, and the last one is quantitative evidence. This is definitely our logos, the biggest example of logos. So it's this idea that you have the statistics, you have the numbers, you have the data to back up the opinion. Okay, now looking at these six, I'm going to show you an example of four. I want you to actually pause for a moment, write these down and in your notes, and I want you to answer what type of evidence this is. So I want you to pause it and then we're going to actually go over the answers in just a moment. Okay, so number one, news article on JFK assassination. What we're looking for is the idea of what type of evidence is it. So first of all, we look at the fact of the context or the context and the content itself. So we're looking at something about JFK assassination. We know JFK was assassinated in the 1960s. None of us, hopefully, were alive during that time period, so that definitely fits into the idea of being historical evidence, which is an aspect and form of secondhand evidence. Okay, the second one, a story about something from your childhood. So it's yours, it's personal, it involves you, it involves some pathos. So this would be an example of personal experience. Number 3, the vote was 56% for and 44% against. This is an example of quantitative evidence because it actually gives you numbers and statistics. The last one, news article about the 6.1 earthquake last week in Northern California. If you lived in Northern California, this is actually a current event. If you have a relative that lives in California and told you a little story about it, and then you went and told that story to somebody else, then it would be an anecdote. So it just depends on how you actually use it and apply it within the story itself. Okay, so now we're going to look at a couple more logical fallacies. So we've already had 7 logical fallacies. Now we're going to add 5 more to it. The first 3 are in the book, but the last 2 I think are not. But I have examples, as you can see on the screen down here, for the last 2 so that you have them to add to it. So that's going to give us 12 logical fallacies. The logical fallacy quiz will actually take place on Monday, September 28th. So you will have that next weekend to study for it after you write your reflection essay. So looking at the first one, post hoc ergo propter hoc. If you actually look in the book on page 106 and look at the definition, it's Latin for after which, therefore, because of. That idea that it means that it is incorrect to always claim that something is a cause just because it happened earlier. So we look at this in history all the time, that just because someone was shot a month before the war started doesn't mean that that person being shot actually caused the war. Just because it was raining that morning and you got in a car accident an hour later doesn't mean that the rain was the cause of the accident. So it fits in with that idea. So looking at the example in the book, we elected Johnson as president, and look, there it goes. Hurricanes, floods, stock market crashes. So just because Johnson was elected doesn't mean that everything else is there. It doesn't mean he caused everything else to happen. Okay, the next one, appeal to false authority. So that one is in your book on page 107. It occurs when someone who has no expertise to speak on an issue is cited as an authority. This happens all the time on TV. They don't have the expert experience. They don't have that expert opinion, and they have no authority or right to speak on it. So we talk about the idea the other day of Kobe Bryant being a sponsor for Turkish Airlines. He has no authority to speak about Turkish Airlines because he doesn't fly airplanes. He doesn't travel Turkish Airlines. So he really has that faulty sense of authority. So when stars back products, it is difficult for us as consumers to actually feel that sense of that authority. If they actually use the product, are meant to be a part of it, then it's different. It's not that false authority. So if a runway model is talking and selling a product about how to walk properly down a runway, then that's correct. It fits their authority, so it's not a false authority. But if a guy is trying to sell you lipstick, it's not necessarily going to fit. So you have to look at that idea with it. Okay, my favorite one is the bandwagon appeal, and this usually is the favorite one of teenagers because you can understand it the most. The bandwagon appeal is this idea that you go up to mom and dad and you ask if you can get a car. And they say no. And you say, but so-and-so has a car, and so-and-so has a car, and so-and-so has a car. So just because someone else has it, you're thinking that you can jump on the bandwagon and get it just because someone else has it. It's this same idea of, oh, I want to go hang out with my friends. All of my friends get to do it. Why can't I? So it's definitely that idea of you want to be the follower. You want to be involved. We see this with fashion trends. Those high-heeled boots, Just because Kim Kardashian wears them doesn't mean everyone else has to wear them too. It's that idea of being able to stick out and be your own self and not follow everybody else. Bandwagon appeal is follow everybody else. Okay, the last two, slippery slope and guilt by association. I'm going to switch the slide so that you can actually see the definitions of them. I highly suggest that you write them down so that you have that. I'm trying to find a place for my camera. So that you have that within your notes itself, like you do with the ones from the textbook. There we go. So slippery slope. You said that if we allow A to happen, then Z will eventually happen too. Therefore, A should not happen. So keeping this in mind, that we're using this idea that, okay, we want to pass this law, but it's going to happen anyway, so we shouldn't pass it to begin with because we don't want that initial thing to happen. So looking at this example, Colin Closet asserts that if we allow same-sex couples to marry, then the next thing we know, we'll be allowing people to marry their parents, their cars, and even monkeys. So it's talking about that first aspect of A. So he's assuming that just because this is allowed to happen, being as in the marriage of same-sex couples, then eventually we will allow this too. So he's basically saying, because this is eventually going to happen, we shouldn't allow this to happen. Okay, so looking at those two, even though they have nothing to do with each other, and even the idea of these happening is not really logical. So that fits in with the idea of the logical fallacy. So that's slippery slope. So you're basically thinking of it as you're sliding down a slide, and it doesn't really matter because it's slipping and sliding, but yet it doesn't fit. There's no real sense of it. There's no stop point to it because they're saying that we'll even get to the point of being able to marry cars and monkeys, which is ridiculous. Okay, the next one, sorry, I went backwards instead of forwards. The next one is this idea of guilt by association. So keeping in mind this idea of guilt by association, it's this idea that just because someone else did it means that it's wrong. So if we look at these, I have three examples here. Hitler was a vegetarian. Therefore, vegetarianism is wrong. So it's accusing the person that just because this one person is associated with this one aspect, therefore it's wrong. Because Hitler's a bad person and he was vegetarian, that makes all vegetarians or the idea of being vegetarian wrong. So you're guilty just because you're associated with one person that chose to be that way. Okay, second one, all dogs have 4 legs. My cat has 4 legs. Therefore, my cat is a dog. So it's making those assumptions based on the fact of the association. We know that most animals have 4 legs. That doesn't mean that most animals are dogs. A dog is a dog and a cat is a cat. Just because they have the same amount of legs doesn't mean that one is the other. So again, it's calling in that guilt aspect there. The last one, John is a con artist. John has black hair. Therefore, all people with black hair are con artists. So looking at the two here is important, that just because he has this occupation and he has this bad aspect to him, and because he has black hair, now we're saying, and the media does this, they make those assumptions, we're saying that all people with black hair are con artists. So it definitely is that idea of that guilt by association. Now your homework over the weekend, and this is already posted on Edmodo and on Jupiter, is not only to have watched the 2 videos, so you should have watched the reflection video and this video, is also to read pages 103 through 109, and on page 109 to do the activity in the middle of the page. Not the one on the bottom, but the one in the middle where it says to identify the logical fallacy in each of the examples. Okay, there can be several answers, especially when you start looking at the idea of the relevancy, the accuracy, and the insufficient evidence aspects. Okay, so that is the last part of your homework. You can write these examples in your book, or you can write them in your notes. It is your choice, and it will be part of what we go over in class on Tuesday. I will see you on Tuesday. Have a great weekend.